Welcome to LawHelp Australia, where we keep you safe and informed with tips and updates. Do you know exactly what happens in the conveyancing process? Have you ever wondered what certificates you need and how adjustments are calculated? My name is Emily Tung, and joining me today we have Russell Cox, property guru and publisher of 1001 Conveyancing Answers. Assisting me today is Dinesh Weerakkody, President of LawHelp Australia and conveyancing lawyer at DLegal, and Antoinette Dooley, a conveyancer from Boutique Lawyers. So Russell, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I've been a lawyer for nearly 40 years. I've been doing conveyancing and property law most of that time, and I worked at the Law Institute for a while advising lawyers about property law. Thanks
for joining us. And Dinesh, what's your experience?
I've studied law at Deakin University from 2000 to 2004. In fact, actually, Russell is my guru, and then I've started after that practicing law. So I think Russell taught me property and ethics.
Property and land law?
Yes.
Wow.
And if you have a question in relation to my answers or my ethical standards, talk to him.
And Antoinette, what's your background?
I've been doing conveyancing for approximately 10 years, and I'm the principal conveyancer at Boutique Lawyers.
Great. So Dinesh, what are certificates in the conveyancing process?
Certificates are basically a bunch of documents that gives us quite a lot of information, valuable information, may I say.
So Russell, are these certificates important, and if so, why?
Well, often they won't be important because they'll tell you what you expect to find, but occasionally they'll be very important, and they also have some information that you do need at the end of the transaction, which is the adjustments. So when you buy a house, you want to know that you own it, and so you do a search of the title. But you also want to know how that property relates with its neighbours and in its local environment, and how it relates to things like heritage and Vic roads and supply of services. So these certificates bring that extra information to the purchaser, the ultimate homeowner.
Right. You've mentioned the title search. Dinesh, what other certificates are there?
There are quite a number of certificates that we can apply for. It depends on the circumstances. There's no a standard list, but of course you will be applying for a title search closer to the settlement or at the initial stages if required at that stage. Vic road certificates, planning certificates to understand the planning and the zoning requirements, environmental protection information can be obtained through the relevant certificates there, land information certificates. So there's quite a number of certificates that we can apply.
Yeah, you've said there's many. How do you know, Russell, which ones to apply for? Should you apply for all of them or not?
I'm a very experienced lawyer, and therefore I tend to make judgments. I don't want to spend my client's money when it's not necessary. But I can therefore take some risks that other lawyers might not want to take. So I have a standard policy of perhaps 3 or 4 certificates.
What are those 3 or 4?
Well, they're the ones that relate to outgoings principally, because adjustments, which we'll talk about later, have to be undertaken at the end of the transaction. So you need to know what the rates are, the council rates, the water rates, sewerage rates, owners corporation. So really they're the minimum of the certificates that you need. Now, if you feel comfortable as the lawyer about the property that your client is buying, and it's in a little court in Vermont, for instance, you're perhaps not going to get a certificate from Vic Roads to tell you that there's not going to be a freeway. You don't need to prove the negative. But a lot of people are more cautious, and they will want to have certificates for everything. So what about you, Alison?
I was going to, and another example of that is the bushfire prone. So depending on the location of the property, on whether that certificate will be required or not. Like if it's more central to CBD, then obviously that's not going to be in a bushfire prone area. Whereas we tend to do a lot of unregistered land and development that's happening out in the north, right across to the western suburbs. So from a purchaser's point of view, they need to know what their liabilities are, especially when they're discussing with builders on what the requirements are. So that is important on whether they do need to take into consideration about bushfire, and also the growth.
Growth areas infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes.
The GATE, as we call
yes.
it. Yeah.
I was going to say that and I thought, no, I'm going to have to extend on that.
Although that's more relevant for a developer purchaser. If we're thinking about if we're thinking about mum and dad purchases, it's not particularly relevant.
So
to
you
them.
look at the purpose for what that property is being bought
Yes,
for?
that's right. Because you could, if you really wanted to, spend about $500 getting all the certificates that are available. And in a situation, for instance, if a bank is selling a property because the mortgage hasn't been paid, then the bank can't make any judgments about these things, and the bank just has to get all the certificates. And that's so when you get a Section 32 in a situation like that, it
becomes a novel.
Yeah, it's about this thick, because they don't know anything about the property unless they have a certificate to tell them. Whereas where you're selling a more conventional property for mum and dad in the suburbs, you don't want to waste that money. It really is a waste.
Russell, in relation to your answer given earlier, if you're acting for a vendor, would your answer be different in relation to the number of certificates that you are planning, would be applying?
Certainly during my long period of practice, the emphasis has changed from purchasers obtaining certificates after they've signed a contract and as they're preparing to settle, that's how it used to be, to now vendors are obliged to disclose a lot of information, not everything about a property, but a lot of information. And one way of providing that information is to obtain these certificates. It's not compulsory, and on occasions I'll prepare a Section 32 statement with no certificates in it. It sends shock and horror through the people that see it.
It would.
But it's a judgment that I'll make in certain circumstances. So the certificates are the obvious, conventional way, but they also are the expensive way. And now vendors tend to provide these certificates at the beginning, and purchasers undertake a checking process as they get closer to adjustment or to settlement.